Welcome to this episode of Toronto Blue Jays Update. The Kyle Tucker situation just took another wild turn, and honestly, I'm starting to wonder if we're ever going to get closure on this thing. Ken Rosenthal dropped a bombshell yesterday saying he called Toronto the leader for Kyle Tucker right now, and that's coming from one of the most plugged-in reporters in baseball. But here's where it gets interesting, because at the exact same time, we're getting major developments on the Bo Bichette front, and one team has suddenly become the clear favorite to land him. This could completely change how everything plays out with Tucker and the entire direction of this offseason for the Blue Jays. Let me start with the Tucker stuff, because Ken Rosenthal doesn't just throw names out there for no reason. When he says Toronto is the leader, that means something. We've been hearing this for weeks now from multiple sources, but what's notable is that we're still not seeing a ton of new teams jumping into the mix. It's basically been the same handful of teams circling, and the fact that Tucker is taking this long tells you he's either being extremely careful with his decision or he's trying to maximize every dollar he can get. Probably both, honestly. Mark Feinstein came out with a report that I think a lot of people missed, and it's pretty telling. According to two industry sources he talked to, they're still tabbing the Blue Jays as Tucker's likely destination. One source literally said once they gave Vladdy the extension, they sent a message that they were going all in to win. Signing Dylan Cease was big, but adding Tucker would obviously finish off a pretty impressive 12 months for them. That's a direct quote, and it aligns with everything we've been hearing. Robert Murray said a few days ago that Tucker wants to play for the Jays. Ken Rosenthal just doubled down on Toronto being the leader. These reporters don't make this stuff up, and at this point, it's not just leverage being thrown around. This is real interest from both sides. But then, late last night, John Heyman throws a curveball into the whole thing. He said the Mets are very, very much in the mix for Kyle Tucker, but still have stiff competition. Now, this is where things get messy, because Ben Nicholson-Smith has been saying over the past week that the Mets have suddenly emerged as maybe even a likelier destination than the Jays for Tucker long term. He walked that back a little bit recently, but the Mets being involved makes sense if Tucker wants to stay in the United States or if he prefers playing in the National League. The thing is, this smells like leverage to me. Someone on Twitter said it perfectly when they wrote, "I smell leverage," and I think they're right. If Tucker isn't getting the money he wants, and clearly he isn't because the Jays haven't offered him $400 million, then his camp is probably trying to create pressure by making it seem like the Mets are serious players here. Ken Rosenthal also said something really important about the Mets. He said they can't rely on a short-term high AAV deal if they want a realistic chance at signing Kyle Tucker. They aren't always easy to do when the market exists to go longer for those players, and I expect that's the position he's going to be in. That's huge for Toronto because it means Tucker is looking for a long-term deal, and that's exactly what the Jays can offer. The Mets might be involved, but if they're not willing to go long-term, then Toronto has a real advantage here. This isn't like the Shohei Ohtani situation where the Dodgers could just throw unlimited money at him. Tucker wants security, and the Blue Jays are in the perfect position to give him that. Now let's talk about Bo Bichette, because this is where everything could shift really quickly. John Heyman dropped a report yesterday saying Bo is looking for somewhere around $300 million. We don't know the exact term, but let's assume it's over 10 years. That's a massive number, and honestly, it's probably higher than what most people expected. But here's the kicker. The Philadelphia Phillies have scheduled a meeting with Bo, and they've done extensive work on the various roster ripple effects, which would require trading Alec Bohm. They're expected to meet with Bichette on a video conference call in the coming days, and the club's interest is legitimate. If it results in a deal, they can move on from JT Realmuto and Alec Bohm and completely reshape their infield. One of the biggest reasons the Phillies are such a possible destination for Bo is because Don Mattingly recently went over there after leaving the Jays. We know Bo and Don Mattingly had a really close connection when they were both in Toronto, so that relationship could be a huge factor here. Bill Madden, who's a former radio guy with about 6,000 followers on Twitter, said his sources are telling him the Phillies right now are the favorite to sign Bo Bichette. He said Mattingly wants to bring Bo with him as a starter, and there's strong mutual interest that could result in a deal when they meet next week. The Phillies would then need to move Alec Bohm, but they're apparently willing to do that. This is where things get really interesting for the Blue Jays, because people are starting to say that once Bo signs, Tucker is going to follow. If Bo goes to the Phillies, then the Jays are all in on Tucker. There's no backup plan at that point. You can't lose both guys and call this offseason a success. Don't get me wrong, Ross Atkins has done a hell of a job so far. The pitching staff is stacked with Dylan Cease, Jose Barrios, Bowden, Francis, and Chris Bassett. The bullpen got better. Kazuma Okamoto gives us another power bat in the lineup. But if we miss on both Bo and Tucker, then suddenly this feels incomplete. You have to get one of them. It's as simple as that. The good news is that the Jays have reportedly increased their efforts to get Tucker. We haven't heard about them increasing efforts to get Bo, probably because he's already scheduled a meeting with the Phillies, and it seems like things are trending that direction. There hasn't been any reports of the Jays having a meeting with Bo, which tells you they might already know he's leaning toward Philadelphia. That's not necessarily a bad thing because losing Bo to the Phillies is way better than losing him to the Yankees or Red Sox or any other American League team, but it does mean all the pressure is now on landing Tucker. Ken Rosenthal's report about the Mets not being able to rely on a short-term deal is huge for Toronto. If Tucker wants long-term security and the Mets aren't willing to go there, then the Blue Jays are in the driver's seat. The fact that we keep hearing from multiple reporters that Toronto is the leader tells you this isn't just smoke, this is real. Tucker wants to be here, the Jays want him, it's just a matter of getting the money right and making sure no other team swoops in at the last second. The other thing to keep in mind is that Tucker taking this long isn't necessarily a bad sign. He's one of the best players in baseball, and he's about to sign a life-changing contract. Of course, he's going to take his time and make sure he's making the right decision, but the fact that no new teams are really emerging besides the Mets, who might just be leverage, tells you the market is pretty much set. It's the Blue Jays and maybe one or two other teams. That's it. Couple other quick notes before we wrap this up. The Blue Jays avoided arbitration with Dalton Varsho and Ernie Clement yesterday, which is good news. Clement especially had a breakout year, and locking him in without going through a hearing is smart. But they didn't settle with Eric Swanson, which means they're going to head to an arbitration hearing, and that could get tricky. Swanson didn't even play in the majors the year before, and then he comes back and dominates in a weird role with the Blue Jays, so figuring out a fair number is going to be difficult. Look, I get it. This whole thing is getting out of hand. We've been hearing the same reports over and over for weeks now, but I really do think we're getting close to something happening. Whether it's Bo signing with the Phillies and then the Jays going all in on Tucker, or Tucker just making his decision outright, things are starting to come to a head here. Ken Rosenthal saying Toronto is the leader matters. Mark Feinstein's sources saying the Jays are still the likely destination matters. Robert Murray saying Tucker wants to play in Toronto matters. These aren't just random reporters throwing stuff at the wall. These are legitimate updates from people who know what they're talking about. So where do we go from here? The Phillies are meeting with Bo next week, and if they land him, then the Jays are all in on Tucker. If Tucker signs elsewhere, then this suddenly becomes a nightmare scenario. But I don't think that's going to happen. I really believe Toronto is going to get this done. They've put in the work. They've shown Tucker they're serious. Vladdy's locked up. Cease is here. The roster is built to win now. All they need is that one final piece, and Tucker is it. Let me know down below what you think is going to happen. Are the Jays getting Tucker, or are we about to get our hearts broken again? I'll keep you updated every step of the way. Cheers.